Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have a person on, James Fester, that he's one of those people I could talk to for hours and hours. And every time we talk, it's one of those we're like, okay, we gotta get to the thing we were supposed to talk to because we could talk about a million other things. He is an educator and a coach and an author. And so before we get to the topic we're going to geek out about today, I first wanted to welcome you to the show, James.
Thanks, Becca. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So if you could share with everyone what has been your journey in education
hmm
and what are the multitude of things you do now?
hmm So yeah, I've done a little bit of everything. So I started out in the classroom as a classroom teacher. I got to teach the middle school, the fun age, for a while, and then after that, kind of eventually transitioned into instructional coaching, both in the areas of project-based learning and also technology. I work for an organization now called PBL Works. You may also have known us as the Buck Institute for Education,
Mhm.
and have been lucky enough to travel around the United States and also the world, getting to talk to teachers and leaders and help them build their own capacity for project-based learning. Um, and in addition to that, like now I do a lot of I do some writing and some work in informal educational areas. I do a lot of work with public lands educational agencies. So our friends outside of the classroom that are a part of the larger educational ecosystem, and am getting ready to have my next book published, which is going to focus on the educational legacy of our national parks. It's going to be coming out at the end of the year. I'm very, very excited about that. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yes, I love it. I love how you have a just a varied range
hmm
of interests and that you kind of live out all of them.
hmm
So, you and I were talking about kind of a common theme of something that you and I do that really impacts what both of us
hmm
do and the wide range of what we do, right? And so we are both wildly passionate about change, right?
Very
And
much so.
there is a model called the change adoption curve
Yes,
that you
there
and
is.
I chatted about, and it is something I've not talked about on this podcast, and I've been wanting to
hmm
talk about for years. It's on my like list of topics I want to talk about. That's like five
Yeah.
pages long, and so I'm so excited to talk about it with you today and hear your experiences. I can share my experiences as well.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of jump right in here. It
Yeah.
change takes about 3 to 5 years to actually
Yep.
shift organizational culture, right? I mean,
Very much so.
ideally,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes it doesn't change at all. It's really
That
quite
is true.
often we see
That is
that
true.
too,
It
right?
it's not a guarantee, and I think we both know that from experience,
Yes.
unfortunately. Yes.
Yes. And the goal is actually that we have change happen closer to that 3 mark, right? In schools,
hmm
we want
Yep.
change to happen as quickly as possible, and that
hmm
is it is not, realistic or I don't know, research, let's just say research shows that really it should take about 3 to 5 years, right? So we want to get close
Yeah.
to that 3 mark. And today I want to talk with you about how do we do that?
hmm Yeah. That's and that is and that is a the $1 million question, really, for any kind of leader or instructional coach. And it's true of any organization. Like, we're going to speak specifically about education because that's our ball game. But it's every school that I've worked in, and I've had the opportunity to work in quite a few in many, many different places, they all have their own kind of character, their own culture, uh, things about them that are unique, their own unique challenges and assets. And so the formula is going to be a little bit different wherever you are. Like, what works for the school down the street may not work for the school up the street, for example. And that makes it a little bit more, I would say, not frustrating, but challenging,
Mhm.
because a lot of times, as you know, like you and I both being folks that love to support teachers and educators and the people that support them, you want to share your successes and your strategies and the formula that got you from point A to point B. And sometimes it's just not as easy as be like, oh yeah, here's the 12 things that we did over 3 to 5 years, and here's how we got there. So there are some similarities. I think there are some things that I have seen, and I've seen effective leaders do in the spaces that I've worked in, that I could definitely say, oh, these are some things to definitely keep in mind. And I'm definitely looking forward to sharing some of the best of the best examples today with your listeners, but it's definitely something that we need to make sure that whatever, regardless of what your plan is, regardless of what initiative you're trying to get off the ground, understanding that what worked for someone next door may not be the same, may not work exactly for you.
Mm.
So I wouldn't, so just a carbon copy Xerox reproduced plan is not going to get you to where you want to be. So I think that's the first thing I would say is you know, definitely lean into your own knowledge of your own school, district, organizational culture when you are considering what to do to help bring more people on board so they feel supported enough to take whatever that leap might be. So that, I think that's the first thing I really want to kind of like disclaimer at the beginning, that
Yeah.
it's tricky sometimes, but
Mhm.
it's very doable no matter what.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I love that. And so I think the thing you're trying to say is, don't, this is not a protocol, what we're going to be sharing. This is
No,
not
that
something that you can take
yes.
and you know, and yeah, anyway, I've
Yeah.
beef with a lot of protocols, but we could talk about that another time. So
That's gonna be the
so
next episode we do. Yes.
next
The
episode,
beef with
why Becca has
protocols.
beef with protocols. All right. So
I
so
would read that book. I would read that
yeah.
book.
Oh, that's a good title of a book. I like that a lot.
Yeah, write that down. You should keep that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The name of my keynote is Resistance Isn't Bad. So here we are.
Oh, all right. Right
No.
on.
Okay. All right. So here we go. I want to talk about first, if you know someone is at the forefront
Hmm.
of having an initiative happen
Sure.
in their school, right?
Yes.
Where do they want to be spending their time?
So I can answer that two ways, but I think let's start by like actually getting into that or that early or that
The
blah, blah,
change
blah. Let me
adoption
try that
curve.
again.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let's start by getting into the change adoption curve because I know that's what we
Mhm.
want to spend the most of our time on. So for
Yeah.
those folks that aren't familiar with it, I mean, go ahead and Google yourself an image of it because what I'm going to describe, it works a lot better as a visual. But basically, what it does is it shows the rate, or it shows basically when you try to initiate change in an organization, that there are stages or
Hmm.
times that people come onto or embrace it. And what you'll see, you imagine just a regular bell-shaped curve. At the front end, you have the early adopters. Those are the people at your school that no matter what you say, they're on board before you open your mouth because they're interested in new ideas. They're always looking for what's next. They're always on board. After that, probably about the next like 14% or so, they are what you call your early adopters, that after a little bit of information, they're genuinely interested and they'll probably go for what you're saying. They just need get a couple of their need to knows answered, and then they're also on board. They have a tendency also to look for new things or be interested in improving and reflecting on their practice. And then we get to the middle, we'll say about the middle 70%. So that really like the peak of that curve. And that is not your early majority and your late majority. And that's the key right there. The early majority are the folks that are going to need more support, more convincing, if you will, more information before they really commit to change. They're not against it necessarily, but they're also not for it in the same way that their early adopter innovator friends are. They are the ones that when you start thinking about a new change or a new initiative, they're the ones that we want to focus our time on, and I'll talk a little bit more about why in a second. And then finally, we have the late majority, which are right behind them. They're generally the ones that are much slower to change. They're very confident what they're doing. It takes a little bit more work to get them on board. And in some cases, the leader themselves is not going to be the one that moves them. So that's something that's important to remember as well. We'll talk about that. And then finally, at the back end, the last kind of like 15 to 16% of that curve are a group that, here it is, they're called the laggards. And I'm just going to say right now, and I know, Becca, you and I have talked about this, I absolutely despise that we call them that because number one, it's just like demeaning and kind of like, it's just a horrible thing to call somebody. Like nobody wants to be called a laggard. And
Laggard.
if you're going to like acknowledge a group is entrenched, like, oh yeah, go ahead and give them a label that's going to entrench them and infuriate them even more. So I wish I had a better title for them. I sometimes call them last adopters or like I don't know, the tail, and call them anything else, but they're known as the laggards in the folks that came up with this theory, and they're the ones that are not going to that they're not going to move.
Mhm.
They are on the hill that they have chosen to die on, and good luck trying to untrench them because they are dug in and very, very difficult to move on. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's kind of what the curve looks like. And we're going to spend most of our time, and as a leader an instructional coach, whoever it is that's leading an initiative, your early majority are the ones you really want to focus on. And those are the strategies we're going to talk about today are going to basically be focused on that group almost exclusively.
Mhm. It's interesting. The conversations I have with coaches and leaders around the
Mm-hmm.
change that they want to implement, they often want to talk about the what I'm going to call them the laggards, which I'm going to call late adopters. Okay, so that's the term I'm choosing to use. Hold on one second. That's okay.
Uh-oh. Is the
Yeah,
air conditioning guy here?
it's no, it's the mailman who is our arch
Ah,
nemesis. Okay.
oh yeah.
So, um, so, often in conversations, and it's so interesting what we put our attention on grows. I want to say
Mm-hmm.
that. And so often people want to talk about these late adopters first, right? We want to
Yeah.
make this change happen. And they're
Yeah.
these they people don't call them late adopters, they call them like the resistors, right? And they want to talk about resistance, which
Yeah.
I actually love talking about resistance. But the fact is we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be putting our attention on our
Yeah.
latest adopters. We just don't.
Yeah.
It's not a good use of our time. We want to spend our time on the folks that they're very willing to adopt the
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. So, um, and it's sometimes tough and it's frustrating too because we do know that people who are resistant to change, they can sometimes even become like folks that kind of undermine support for it, and so we feel as though like jumping in and spending all of our time defending our ideas as opposed to like really trying to make moves to help others embrace them is the best use of our time. And I'm not necessarily sure that's true. I'm not saying it's not a good idea to like confront or address misconceptions or just like the rumor mill in some ways, but I don't think that should be the focus of your time. So we talk about the early majority as the key because what we're trying to do is build momentum by force of numbers behind a movement. What we need to do, your early adopters are always going to get on board fairly easily after a little bit of extra support and a little bit of hand holding. Your innovators are on board before you open your mouth. The
Mhm.
early majority of the ones that need to know a little bit more about how it's going to benefit them. How is, for example, I'm going to use project-based learning as an example because that's the realm that I operate in. Project-based learning is something that is very, for those who are familiar with the pedagogy, it's very learner-centered. It's very teacher-facilitated as opposed to teacher-directed. It's collaborative, which means that and group and teaming are a part of it. It culminates in a public product that like then goes out into the world and is useful or consumed by those outside of the classroom. And these are all things that sometimes can scare the heck out of teachers, especially if they come from a more
Mhm.
traditional educational background and they
Mhm.
have a shtick that works for them. It's like, and I've met plenty of these teachers that are like, hey, you know what? This is what I do and it works really well. Look at my test scores. Like, why on earth would I want to consider this change?
Of course. Yeah.
That right there is like early majority, like 101, because they didn't say, like, I'm not going to. They're like, why? I want to know more why. I want you to tell me why. And so a lot of the workshops that I do are 3 days of me. It's not just saying why, but also how. And a lot of times, once they learn that a lot of what we talk about is affirming to them, that's all they need. And then they're over on it. And they're like, oh, that's not going to be a big shift after all. So I think key one to getting that early majority is clear communication, is also clear communication and a clear plan or next steps and expectations that go in. When we work with schools and we want the teachers to start doing PBL, the first thing we say is this is the expectation that we have for you. We want you all to do one project in the fall and then one project in the spring. You get to choose the content, you get to choose the time frame, and this isn't something that's going to be coming down on you during evaluation time, because the expectation is that you do two projects and you try. End of discussion. And now you need to tell us what we need to provide you so that you would do that. And that eliminates a lot of fear because a lot of times when you hear about a new initiative, you go, how long is this going to go on for? Like, what do you expect of me? Is this going to be on my evaluation? What if I'm not on board? Da, 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 da. We eliminate those things at the beginning and we keep clear and constant communication. And one thing that I've seen really smart leaders do is they very quickly, instead of trying to do it all themselves, they get a representative cross section of their school together. Okay, an AP, an instructional coach, a couple of teachers, like one early adopter and one that's like, maybe I gotta learn more. And that becomes the team that leads the initiative. And everything that is decided by the team, orchestrated by the leader. So it's not the leader that's pushing for the change, the leader who's leading the initiative, it's this team. And that's a very powerful thing because then it doesn't become one person who's having to do it all. It doesn't become one person's pet project or thing. It is a community or a group expectation. And so when we do our leadership workshops at the org that I work for, we want you, if you're going to do systemic work with, you're bringing a team in. We want a team of champions who are going to come together and lead this work together. And we want the folks that are going to be expected to do the change to see themselves in the makeup of that group. And so that's one thing that I would say, if nothing else, make sure that when you're leading initiatives, you have a small group that has decision-making power around you and that it is representative of people there. Doesn't mean you have to bring on a laggard who's just going to sit there and completely do nothing. Like that's, you want to pull from that early majority group to try to get them in for multiple reasons. But that's a big one right there, is clear communication with a team instead of an individual leading the initiative.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I'll include in the show notes, I will include a visual of this adoption
Yeah.
curve. And I think so there's so there's
So it's more than just us going like
I
this with
know,
our
just being
hands,
like
right? Yeah.
it's this.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
please, those listening, please check out the YouTube kind of video version of this episode as well. You get the unedited raw version. Um, so Okay, so there's some patterns here I want to highlight here because I'm loving what you're saying. Like each
Mm-hmm.
group has different needs, and I'm very much a big proponent of differentiating for different teacher needs, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
this is just another way of looking at teacher needs, how different people adopt change, right? And their willingness
Yeah.
to change in this specific way. Some people are very willing to change in some ways, some not in others. And
Yes.
so, there's and this is ways that I have had districts and schools adopt change as well. We start with a small group. And I think
Yes.
sometimes what happens, and sometimes I'm brought into certain situations where often it's a district mandate. And
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
district says
Yes.
we have purchased this program for
Yeah.
$2 million, and everyone needs to implement it. We're gonna
Yeah.
watch your usage, right? We're going to track your usage. And so everyone suddenly has to do this program, and the expectation from school leaders is that everyone will adopt all at once, right? That there's this like
Yeah.
everyone now mentality, and that is
Doesn't need to
actually
be. Yeah.
not that's
No,
not how change happens.
not at all. Yeah, it's a misconception that you need everybody on board in order for change to not just take place but take root. Absolutely not true. And to be perfectly, let's just go ahead and we'll just like kind of let everybody off the hook with that one. You're never going to get everybody on board with whatever. You could literally go into a room with 100 people and say, "Hey, I think we all need to like breathe oxygen and drink more water to improve our health." You would have at least four people that would be like, no, never. And they would get up and walk out right there. There's no idea that is going to get everybody, you're going to get everybody on board with. It's just not going to happen. So don't stress with that. Your goal is to get a critical mass of support behind your idea within the first couple of years.
Mhm.
That's if you want to get to the 3-year change mark, you are going to try to aim thinking 2 years out. What can you do to get it to build critical mass or critical acceptance of this? Because, and here's where the late majority comes in, because we're focusing all our time on trying to get buy-in from that early majority, from that first third of your staff that will probably do it, but may not be excited or enthused about it. And once you get those people on board and you've already got your early adopters and you've got those innovators that are always ready to go, you've got more than 50% of your staff, right? You are, excuse me one second. My Slack is blowing up and I don't want you to have to listen to that in the background. We'll try that again. Once you have that group, you have more than 50% now. Like you've got almost 50% of your staff on board. And now what you're going to see is, and this is the second one, the second thing that's really helpful is it's not, it not only do you get to leverage peer, you get to leverage the power of peer pressure, because now what you have, positive peer pressure, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but people, when they see their friends and their allies in like, because they may not see the leader of their school as like one of them, which, you know, it's just the truth of the matter. There are divisions and that's something that we got to accept. And I feel it the same way. I walk into a school as a professional development person and, you know, you can kind of see that there are folks that are like, you're not really one of us. But when they start to see their friends at their table, their trusted allies, their partners for 10 years start to get on board and be like, oh, okay, I think I see. Yeah, this is actually, I think I can see how this can work. That's where the money is. They start to gravitate towards it because it's like getting endorsement. You know, it's getting endorsements from influencers, if you want to, you know, use the modern day kind of comparisons, is they're starting to see other people whose opinions they trust and who they respect get on board with it. And that's how the late majority that's how that late majority starts to come on board. And then for the ones that are really at the end are, you know, are super late adopters slash laggards. At some point, so many people are on board that it actually becomes more of a liability to not be there, because it's like you're standing by yourself and now you're the only people that aren't doing this. And you're starting to see people look at you and being like, what's their problem? It starts to be unsafe to be that voice of just like pure resistance, because you're getting left behind and you know it and you can feel it. And that's what starts to bring that last 16% or that last 15% into the fold, is that it just starts to become the way that things are done. And now you're not the person that's doing things like we all do. And it's so interesting too, because what you're doing is almost flipping the language that they first used at the beginning to more or less say like, oh, this is why we're not going to do it, because they're like, why can't we do things the way that we always have done them? Or why can't we do things the way that we all do them now? By the end of year 2, beginning of year 3, if you've done your job and you've gotten that critical mass of support, now everybody else is saying, why can't you get on board with doing things the way that we're all doing them? And it's essentially the exact mirror of what they said at the beginning. And it's really interesting, and it's far, far more effective, and in some cases, the only thing that will move that group. And so that's something that you should really try to keep in mind, is what can you do to build that critical mass, to build in and to get that late majority and that early majority on board, because then it kind of just becomes its own thing and it snowballs, and eventually it just becomes a part of the culture, and a heck of a lot quicker than the 5-year mark if you're doing it effectively.
Exactly. No, I love that so much, and just having like normalizing behaviors and adopting
Yeah.
whatever change you're wanting to adopt. And I also know, you know, when change happens and you have that large majority
Yeah.
of people, not the late majority, which is a chunk, it's like that large majority
Yeah.
happen, they've adopted the change and they are continuing that change because they're seeing results. Like this isn't
Yes.
a blind, this isn't lemmings here, right? And I know like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
teachers are such wonderful critical thinkers, and I love that they question things, and I love my
Mm-hmm.
teachers experiencing
Yeah.
resistance. I'm like, yes, like question things. I did as a teacher. I'm sure you did as a teacher, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what's great about that late majority is
Mm-hmm.
they are able to see, they have the
Yeah.
opportunity to see, that people are producing results now, right? Children are learning better, are more engaged, right? Whatever
Yeah.
the goal, or understanding their social emotional learning, whatever the goal is, right? That's actually happening.
Yeah, and so and that kind of brings us to the third thing that I would say, and this is something that this is where it gets a little bit different for every school because every school uses their resources a little bit differently. Release time, instructional minutes, PLC time, professional development resources, yada yada yada. The tool chest that every school leader has to implement this kind of third step is something that's going to be different. It's going to be different at every school, and it is like you said, you want that late majority to see results, to see the success, to see that they have trusted colleagues who have done this and said, oh, yeah, it's great. This is what I'm getting. And then this one kid who never did anything for me is now my best student. All those great stories that are the proof positive that this change is worth trying.
Mm.
And that is you take those folks that are having that success and you turn them into what I like to call lighthouses. I came up with this.
Yes.
I was working with a group of teachers in Massachusetts, and they love math. They love lighthouses in New England. They're just like they're crazy about them. And so what I said was, you find those people that are having the success that are also like they have some political capital, social capital in your school, and you put them on a pedestal and you make sure everybody can see them, and they will slowly draw that support in around them, just like a lighthouse leading ships into harbor. And so let them stand up at the beginning of a staff meeting and just talk for 10 minutes about what's going on. Help them to get the work their students are doing out there so that other people can see it. Get a student panel together to come to the first part of a PLC where the students can talk about everything that they're doing that they love about whatever the initiative is. Again, I'm using PBL as my example because that's my jam. If you have a communication thing like a newsletter that people read, like throw it in there. I used to work at an independent school out here in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I now live. And one of the things that we started doing, which like at first I was kind of like, I was kind of in the late majority on it. I was like, I don't know how this is going to work because there's so much that we already have to do. Anyway, oh, this could be an email, but we had a staff member come in and they got 30 minutes of, or 20 minutes of a staff meeting periodically, I think it was every other month or something like that. And they got to basically stand up and talk about one thing they were doing in their classroom that they thought was valuable. And the administration basically was like, just go. Like, you don't have to tell us what it is, just tell us what you need, and we want you to share it. And what they would do is they would go and they would encourage people to do that when they saw good things happening, but they left it very open. And that was what people knew about it, was that like this person's getting up and they're basically going to say what they want to say and share what they want to share and make their practice public.
Mhm.
And it's not something that's orchestrated with like, let's all get on board under like it became something that the staff saw as their 20 minutes, not their administrators 20 minutes. And that became that was really interesting. And I saw it as an instructional coach there. Like I was going around as a technology coach helping people do things. And I remember seeing there was a woman who was really good with spreadsheets and using them to analyze student data. And she did a mini lesson on here's a really simple formula you can use to create a spreadsheet that can track student growth or student decline in terms of assessment data. She did it for 20 minutes at a staff meeting. And over the next couple of weeks, I saw so many people looking at spreadsheets on their computer. Like, not all of them did it, but
Mhm,
they were
mhm,
all considering it. And I was like, whoa. And that's when I went from late adopter to like late majority to like, oh, yeah, this is the thing. I want to get in on this, is how I
mhm,
felt. Because I got stuff to share that I think people would like too. So that third thing I think is super important. It is, who are the folks that are going to draw other people in, that are
mhm,
doing good work, that are following through with the initiative and having success, and what can you do to make sure everybody can see them, and doing it in a way that's not like playing favorites. Like it's a
mhm,
tricky line to walk, and I wish I had like a great way to tell you this is how you do it without making it look like you're putting up your your teacher's pet or whatever up there. But like if you really do get a wide cross section and make whatever that communication mechanism is as something that
mhm,
belongs to the staff and not you, and you're making sure that even folks that are not like the usual folks are the ones that get
mhm,
to get up and share, that can be a very powerful thing. And so I would highly suggest you do that, because that's how late majorities start to move, and that's how you get critical mass.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Mhm.
And thinking through, right, we're talking about this change adoption curve, and it's never this smooth, right? It's never this simple that
Never.
like humans are not this simple where it's this beautiful curve of like
Yeah.
2.5% innovators and 13.5%, right? Like it's just never that, right? So when we're dealing with
No.
complex human beings,
Yeah.
all these folks have different motivations, right? And so I do want to put a quick plug. I do have like a free webinar that people can download called The Happy Secret to Building Buy-in, and it's all about how can we see different educators' motivation and
Yeah.
willingness to change and support that within this
Yeah.
change adoption curve, right? So there
Yeah. Yeah.
is there's a couple things I was thinking about when you were talking. One was, what would how as the leaders of the school are initiating this change, creating a team, right? Spending a lot of their time with those innovators and early adopters, right? What I was thinking like, oh, what do we want them to be doing with those latest adopters? I think I like the term latest adopters.
Latest adopters. I think
Latest
we're going to go with
adopters.
that one.
Yeah, you like that
I
one?
mean, yeah, literally anything
And
is
not
better than
laggards.
laggards. You could,
Or
no,
anything's better.
nothing,
So
never.
so the latest, so what, how do we it's clearly not, they're not like absent of interacting with them. Like, listen, I'm just
Yeah.
not going to talk to you for 6 months, right? So
Yeah.
what would I want them, what when I'm in schools, like what do I want them, the
Hmm.
thing I want them to be doing is building relationships and trust.
Yeah.
Like having that solid credibility really, within that relationship with those folks that are like, listen, I'm not going to adopt this change, but I do enjoy having you in my classroom. I do feel
Yes.
respected by you, right? I do know that you can
Yeah.
see what I care about, right? That's where
Yeah.
I would say leaders and coaches should be putting their attention at that time of initiating that
Yeah.
change with the latest
Yeah.
adopters. What do
Yeah.
you think?
I would agree. So yes
Mhm.
to all of that. I would and I actually am totally going to check out that webinar that you just mentioned too, because I'm very curious about like what you've identified and see that. So if make sure that I rephrase the question really quick. So you're asking like, how do you build the relationships that are required in order to move folks at the same time the initiative is going on? Is that what I heard?
My
Or
question is when the
oh, sorry.
change is beginning and
Yeah. Okay.
a
Yes.
school like school leaders and coaches are focusing on those innovators and early
Hmm.
adopters, right? What should be their intention and their focus when interacting with
Oh, yes. Okay.
our
Gotcha.
latest adopters at the beginning of the change?
Okay. Yeah. So like again, clear communication, making sure those expectations are clear. We already talked about that. Those things should be true of everybody. Um, Another thing that's really helpful is making sure that they are feeling heard, making sure that,
Hmm.
and this is
Really
something that
great.
I'm taking this idea from another leader, what she did, and I thought it was a gutsy move. So it may not be perfect for everybody because, like I said, what works for one school is not going to work for another. She put a giant parking lot up on the wall when
Mm,
she first shared. They were going to a PBL model, and they were changing the entire schedule. And you
mhm.
want to do something that really gets teachers like up in arms, and like, that curve starts to shift more towards the late adopter
A
side
lot of late
of the
majority.
oh my goodness, yeah, because I've been through schedule changes before, and it's quite the endeavor. But that was what she was going to propose. She was going to, she had met ahead of time with a small group. She had done a lot of pre-work to really think about it. She had done a lot of listening sessions and things. So she had really tilled the soil, so to speak, to really make sure that the conditions were prime for this change to take root and really grow. And then but at some point she had to let everybody know about it. And so I remember what she said is she put that parking lot up there, and she said, I'm going to share with you for about this much time, um, a new initiative, a change that's coming next year. And I want you to listen for 20 minutes. There's post-its on the table in front of you. Anything you have to say, any questions you have, write them down while I'm talking. And at the end, we're going to have some structured discussion about what I said. But feel free at any time to start putting post-its over there, because any question you have, any concern you have, you put it up there. I will address it by the end of the week in my weekly email. And then she let that drop, and people kind of reacted very much like she thought they would. There was a lot of, "Oh, wait a minute," and there was a lot of, "Oh, I heard this was coming," because there's no secrets in a school. And to her credit, she let them put whatever they want up there, and there were all kinds of comments. There were some that were like, "Oh, I want to know more about this," and there were some that like, "This isn't how we do things here. Like, have you? This is going to be dogs and cats will start living together. It'll be mass hysteria," or whatever else they machinations they had coming from it. And that was up there for everybody to see. At the end of that meeting, not everybody was on board, but she said, "You know what? The one thing they couldn't say was they couldn't say that I didn't hear their concerns, and they couldn't say that I ignored what they had to say, because 3 days later, she released that entire thing. She typed up all those questions and she put them out with her replies or with additional information. And that was what she did. And she said it that could have gone the other way. Like, let's be honest, that could have literally you putting out all of the concerns and all of the crazy machinations in people's heads to the entire staff. But for them, it diffused a lot, and it kind of not undercut, but it really kind of headed off a lot of problems, because she identified a couple of things that were either miscommunications on her part or were just not like true, and she was able to correct that. Like, "Oh, I hear what you're saying here, but what I actually meant to say was da 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 da." Like, you will still have this many minutes of prep every week. Like, that's not, and so like those people kind of went, "Oh," and they moved from the latest adopters, the later adopters, into the late majority, early majority, just from that one thing. She said that's what got her to 3 years.
Wow.
There were big systemic changes that she made to support the initiative, which in this case was PBL, but that one move really softened things. And remember, she also had, like we said, a team that was a representative cross section of her school that she had put together. And there were people on there that were also like, "Yeah, we're not saying that we're on board with this yet. We're here because we really need to make sure our interests are being here." And they were able to say like, "I got some concerns that some people have brought to my attention," and that became the problem solving cadre. But yeah, all of those things were out there, and she was very public with them. She like what's the saying that, like, that sunlight is a cure for all, sunlight cures all evils or whatever. Like, that's more or less what it was. Is she's like, "I'm not going to like pretend people didn't see these. I'm not going to take these post-its and hide them in a drawer ever. We're celebrating these. Like, there's not like, there's no hard question. I need to know about them now rather than later, so that I can adjust this if need be." And that's what happened. And to her credit, it worked very well. So that's one, is just making sure that they're heard and making sure that you're really public about that, so they can't ever say, "Well, you're not listening to me." And I mean, as we know, like as coaches, like sometimes like you have to make time for those longer conversations and those longer sit downs with people, especially one-on-one, because we know that like you get a group of people that are resistant together, and like they kind of like all kind of support and feed each
Yeah.
other's energy. But then when you take them one or take them out of the group and like sit down, they're usually much more reasonable and much more willing to chat, because they're no longer on stage, basically. That's another really big one too, is like just sitting down and be like, "Yeah, I'd love to follow up with some of the things you said in the meeting, because like I just want to understand this more, and I'm not sure I see it the same way." Oh, I got one more. This is funny. I learned this little verbal maneuver from a camp director that I worked with when I was a summer camp counselor. So stay with me here, because it's a gem, and it's something that I'd love to pass on to people, because it served me so well talking with parents, talking with teachers that were resistant. When somebody has an opinion, or somebody comes at you with something that you either know is completely false, like, "No, this is not," like something about your initiative is completely false, something that is a complete like almost adversarial kind of point of view to something you're trying to do, and you want to make sure that you're like, "I got to push back against this. I got to offer additional information, but I don't want to get into an argument." And we had to do this all the time at the summer camp, because I'd have to call up a parent and tell them like, "Your kid did this," but of course their kid is an angel at home. Like, what are you talking about? My child would never do that. They are obedient and respectful. They're little Lord Fauntleroy when they're at home. The problem is the inclination being like, well, it's not my child, it's you, right? You're the problem. You're just not understanding my kid. And so when I would have those calls, I struggled with them. This camp director said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to say, that's really great to hear because it's not what I'm seeing right now. And I was like, this never going to work. Like, really, that's the advice you have for me? And I tried it the next time, and it completely changed the tenor of the conversations I've had from now on. Because what I was doing was I wasn't telling her she was wrong about her angel child. I was telling her, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying, completely understand, and I hear you completely correctly. But this is what I am seeing, because what you are saying is true, but what I am saying is also true. And then that conversation then becomes, well, how can we rectify these two things, or what should we do in support of our greater goal, which is just making sure your kid has a good time here. And so I use that all the time, especially in coaching conversations where people are extremely resistant and to almost like adversarial to me in terms of what PBL is or is not going to do for their classroom. I always say, like, I've heard these studies say it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, it's really interesting. I really appreciate you telling me that, because there's this other information that I'd like to share with you, or, oh, that's really interesting. Like, that's not the experience that I've had. Can I tell you a little bit more about what I've seen happen in similar situations? And it really, it's so simple and it's so silly, but like, man, it has saved me from a lot of just like, well, this is a shouting match. I'm getting up and leaving because, So I love that, and I think it's a great coaching prompt and a great like a great sentence stem for really constructive disagreement, as opposed to like, like the what is it the just like what could turn into a complete relationship killer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we need to be wrapping up, but there's something that you and I, the last time we talked, like chuckled about around the innovators. And there is a
Yes.
video of a guy
Oh yeah.
dancing, and I will
Yes.
include this in the show notes.
Oh yes.
And
Yep.
he's called Dancing Guy, and he's also called the Lone Nut. And I was
Yep.
first exposed to this video when I was a
Yep.
teacher, and my principal
Oh
ran
yeah.
up to me and she said, "Becca,
It's an oldie but a
you're the
goodie
lone
on
nut."
YouTube.
It's such a
Yeah,
great video, and it's
such a
about
great video.
how it's actually not the innovators that cause momentum and a change. And I
No.
love that it's really important for us to keep that in mind, that change actually requires momentum, right? It's not
Yeah.
like the leader telling people to do
Yeah.
things and them
We got
following
to get that
directions,
early
right?
majority. Exactly. Yeah.
Right, right. And how do we do that? It's actually about the first followers. So I'm going to leave
Yep.
that teaser
Yeah.
in here. Watch the video. It's very short. It's like a 3-minute video
Yeah.
on leadership. And it's a
Even, yeah.
funny video about a guy who is dancing
Yeah.
wildly at a
Yeah.
festival.
Even if you've already seen it, because I'm going to guess that a lot of the folks have seen it at some point, because it's been around for like, at
Years.
least a decade or two, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's been
Yeah.
around for a while. But like, I revisit it because I rediscovered it recently, and that's why we
Mhm.
started talking about it, because
Yeah.
I saw things that are so like, just there's so much to unpack in that video. And like you said, like one of the things you got out of it was the momentum importance. One of the things that I got out about it was that the least important person
Mhm.
in that video, like the least important, or the least, the one who was responsible for that change in the video that you see taking hold, wasn't the lone nut. It was the first few people that joined the lone nut. And it was really important because the person who's the narrator, if you see the narrated portion of that video, talks about the undersung heroes, or the undersung heroes of those of initiatives, which are the first couple of people that make it
Mhm.
safe to try something new,
Mhm.
and how to get those folks on. But also, like, as a leader, what we should be thinking about is not only how do we get those people on board, but how do we kind of like support and reward that kind of willingness to
Mhm.
try things and stick with them. And
Mhm.
stick with them is the important thing. Your early, your innovators are going to do new stuff all the time, but we want them to stick with it and become the folks that bring in and cheer on and call for their friends to come and join them. And so, yeah, like I totally agree. Definitely rewatch it if you haven't. maybe even show it to your, if you get the small group of people that are helping you with your initiative together, show
Mhm.
it to them, and then use it as a way to demonstrate like this is what we're trying to do, and like who are these people, and at our school, like, yeah, absolutely love that video, love that you brought it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love talking about change. Thank you so much for just sharing your
Absolutely,
wide
thank you.
range of experience with change. And I'll put all those links I mentioned in the show notes. And just
Yep.
if folks want to know more about you or more about the things that you are doing,
Yeah.
where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can definitely find me at my website. It's festeredu.com. You can, yeah, that talks a little bit about some of the work that I do and things like that. The one that I would probably plug, because my latest initiative is actually partnering with, like I said, public lands agencies and helping them to improve their educational programs through using, tried and true classroom methodologies and bringing them into our national parks and public spaces. And that's actually nationalparkclassroom.com. And so if you want to check that out, that's the website I'd love people to go see, because teachers can learn a lot from our national parks, and our national parks can learn a lot from our teachers. And so I'd love for people to see that and tell me what they think about it.
I love that. Really cool. Well, thank you again
Yeah,
for joining us.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.